Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your CEO, Douglas Macgregor, and we have a special guest this evening. This is a gentleman who is a very well-known writer. He's published at least 13 books under his own name. He's got a couple of books coming out in the near future. I'm sure he's got many more in him. He's also the founder of an organization called Fox and Company, which is a marketing consulting firm. And that's really his specialty. So, Jeffrey Fox, welcome. We're happy to have you this evening. And we'd appreciate it if you'd take a little bit of time and tell us how you got into this business of advising CEOs and straightening out corporations and companies.
Well, thank you very much. It's a flattering introduction. So after I got out of school, I went to work for three great companies. Hugh-Blind, now called Diageo, Pillsbury, and Loctite. Loctite people might know from Superglue. When I started Fox and Company, all three clients, prior consigliere to the CEOs and all, our basic thing is how to help them with innovation, new products, new ways of doing things, and also how to dollarize the value of what they sell. We help them position their products, help them with brand names, help them with taglines, making it crystal clear to their target customers how that target customer can benefit from our clients' technology, their products, their services. It's a little unique, but it's a cool thing to do. So that's what we do.
Well, it's obviously worked very well for you. And you have advised a number of CEOs. What do you, when you encounter leaders in the private sector, I say leaders, maybe they're managers, maybe that's a better term. What is, based on your experience, the most common problem that they confront that you can help them with?
Well, in my view, there are four sustaining factors for enterprise success, whether it's business, the clergy, hospitals, military, whatever. And those four are marketing, i.e. getting and keeping of customers, innovation, new products, novel ways of doing things, wise leadership, and winning culture. So winning culture, I think, is probably the most elusive of sustainable factors. And it doesn't mean good or bad culture. Not every good soldier wants to be a Navy SEAL. Not every marketing person wants to work for Procter & Gamble. But a winning culture, not good or bad, but winning, is the hardest thing for, especially in turnaround situations or startups, for companies to acquire. Great companies, the Marine Corps, the New York Yankees, Procter & Gamble, they have winning cultures, and they sustain those, they work on it, they cherish it. And a winning culture is really like a corporation's or an enterprise's immune system. They know, that culture knows if the new body should be rejected or not. So I think that's probably the trickiest thing and you can see it when it goes bad. And I think today's world, when everybody talks about woke, that woke is really probably a misunderstood word in many places, but it means the culture is changing. The culture is losing its focus on its original customers, on why it exists, on why people should do business with them. And whether it's a business or non-business, like a military organization or something like that. Going woke is a joke.
Well, understanding the purpose and retaining an appreciation for the original purpose is critical. You know, in 1939, when George Marshall finally became Chief of Staff of the Army, and he was already 58 years old. So no one today can imagine serving that long as a full colonel, becoming a brigadier general, and then 18 months to 2 years later, suddenly you're a 4-star in command of the United States Army. But that's what happened to him. And somebody pointed out that there were serious cultural problems in the Army. And his answer was, well, we'll fix that. Change the people and you change the culture.
Change the leadership. That's right.
So he removed hundreds of generals and colonels over the next 2 to 3 years. And it was a process that actually went on throughout the entire Second World War. But the biggest problem they found was that over time, military organizations become very focused on peacetime interests, garrison priorities. In other words, they lose their focus on fighting. It's almost unavoidable, because unless you are periodically shot at, your predisposition is to sit back, light up, and relax.
Well, that's winning culture, right? And that's wise leadership. And going back to your original question, Doug, leadership, what is it? Being called a leader doesn't mean you're a good one. Having it on your business card doesn't mean that makes you a leader. And leadership is a very elusive kind of concept. I know that West Point teaches, great generals are first on the battlefield and last off. Now you know what that means, right? And so,
unfortunately, very few of them follow that.
Oh, you think?
And something like the Marine Corps, or even the Navy, you pointed out, these are organizations that are preoccupied with avoiding changing anything. They think they are successful. Being successful means, in the minds of most of the people in charge of those organizations, no change. Change is treated as inherently bad. Anybody who's spent any time in Washington will tell you that no good idea survives contact with the Pentagon. So this is an enormous problem in government. It's not just the military, it's the whole government. Nobody wants to change anything, because when you do that, you also disrupt the flow of money. And this is a problem for organizations that are not in business to make a profit.
Right. Everybody fears change, even though it's inevitable. It's one of the reasons why companies that are coasting along without changing all of a sudden find themselves in great peril. Specific illustration: Kodak. Kodak invented the technology for the cell phone camera, but because it would completely change their whole infrastructure so Kodak goes from 180,000 employees and 2 years later to bankruptcy because they would not change.
Mm-hmm.
Bethlehem Steel saw the small Japanese steel refineries coming, but they couldn't change. They had 100 years of investment in the old way of doing things. So what happens? They lose. And
Yes.
and that's why sometimes you need completely new leadership to change things. And and that's a courageous event by the people that put in the new change agent and the change agent that goes in there. And the first thing the change agent has to understand is that if you look at an organization, it's a bell curve. 10% of the people want to change, 10% of the people don't want to change, and 80% of the people in the bell curve want to know, tell me what to do so I can do a good job. The problem is the naysayers talk about today, and they are very influential. Oh, he's going to make you learn to speak Spanish, da 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 da. The 10% that want to change are talking about the future, and they're talking about a fear. And so they are oftentimes overwhelmed by the naysayers. So the first thing a wise leader does, if he's a change agent, is get rid of the negative naysayers, not the truth-telling naysayers, not the truth tellers, but the negative naysayers who don't want to change, who want to hurt this new change agent. And it takes a great leader, wise leaders, to come in and quote unquote clean house. That's what Hercules did with the Augean stables. He cleaned house. And that's what someone has to do in Washington, for example, is to clean the administrative swamp. We don't know what the swamp is. We just know it exists. We don't know the denizens of the swamp. We don't know whether they're pythons or rattlesnakes, but they're there. And what they do is they thwart everything that's change. You can't tell a Democrat from a Republican or from a whatever, because if to change means they're going to lose their little mansion on K Street, they're going to lose their forever pension, they're going to lose way more than they bring back to people. That's a very difficult thing to change, where the successful system is embedded.
Well, the successful system is the one that survives despite all attempts to change it, unfortunately.
That's right. And It's insidious. I was at court, in judicial courts, watching these. For some reason, I don't know why I was there, but whatever. And there were lawyers on one side were screaming at the other, guys screaming at the other, and all they were doing is playing tennis, throwing the ball back and forth so their fees would go up. After this very contentious day in court, they're all at the bar later at the Hearthstone, all drinking with each other. It's a joke. And so it's the same thing that happens with any embedded society that can't change. And historically, and you're better at this than I am, you know that, but historically, great empires, great companies, and so forth have gone away because they wouldn't change. And they knew they should. You think the people at Polaroid didn't know that that the technology was changing, or that Kodak, that cell phone cameras were coming, Bethlehem Steel? They knew it. They saw it coming, but they couldn't change.
Well, of course, there's a famous book called Only the Paranoid Survive, which is a wonderful book, and I enjoyed it immensely. The problem that I confronted the author with was I'm running into people in charge who are absolutely not paranoid. They're totally confident that you can be crushed if you want to change anything. And so there was no sense of paranoia. There was just an insistence on read my lips. This is the way it's always been. It's going to stay that way.
And you see it all the time. It goes down every little nook and cranny of the organization is invested in the old way that no longer works. Invested in the old way. Who was the great? Is it Zumwalt? Who was the great naval admiral? Was it Zumwalt? The guy
in the American Navy?
Yeah, the guy that did the nuclear powered.
Oh no, you're talking about Hyman Rickover.
Oh, Rickover. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody listening to this or watching this show should read a book about Hyman Rickover. He was told, you can't do it, can't do it, can't do it. It takes 50 years. And what did he do? He nuclearized. Was it first nuclear power sub or aircraft?
Yes.
I don't know.
Submarines first. Yes.
So it was absolute. It's an absolute. Still today, it's one of the most astonishing engineering feats of all time. Mm-hmm. Of all time. And Rickover, he may have been a tough bird, but he was completely the right choice to do this because he completely discounted all the old ways of doing things, including how he manages men, et cetera, et cetera. So
well, the interesting thing about Hyman Rickover was that when he reached the rank of captain in the Navy, which is the equivalent to a full colonel in the Army, he came up on his 30-year point. And everyone in the Navy, all the admirals, with one or two exceptions, were celebrating because this meant that he would have to retire and they'd finally get rid of Rickover. Well, what happened was that Russell, who was the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, called the Secretary of the Navy. And he said, are you aware that Captain Hyman Rickover is about to retire? And of course, Secretary of the Navy, as like most secretaries of services, are just messenger boys for the admirals and generals. They don't do anything, and they like to wear funny hats and visit the troops, but they're otherwise sort of political non-entities. And so the Secretary of the Navy said, no, I wasn't aware of that. He said, well, listen here, goddammit. He said, we don't want a Navy without Hyman Rickover in it. He said, so you got to promote him and make him a rear admiral as soon as possible. And he quibbled it. He said, well, listen, if you're not going to do it, I'm going to call the president, and I know Eisenhower will promote him. He said, I understand completely. He said, I will take care of it. So he got off the phone. He called in the chief of naval operations and said, bring me the instructions for the promotion board, because the Secretary of the Navy under law is the real commander of the United States Navy, not the CNO. And he said, I want you to promote one officer in the grade of captain with a PhD in physics, who is an engineering duty officer only. And I want him promoted to rear admiral. And that was Hyman Rickover. But if it hadn't been for external intervention by the political leadership, nothing would have happened.
Well, he is probably, history will tell us differently, clearly one of the most important military leaders this country's ever had.
Absolutely.
Because remember I said the four sustaining factors: marketing, innovation, wise leadership, and winning culture. Innovation was Rick. I know he's a wise leader as well, but innovation is what he did. He figured out a way to do it that nobody thought could happen. So I'm glad they did. I didn't know that backstory. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunately, that's the way things change in the military because the bureaucracies are incapable of reforming themselves. So
Well,
unless you have external intervention from the civilian side, in most cases, nothing happens.
no, that's right. That's right. The swamp is part of that. I mean, whether you like him or not, Trump made an interesting comment. He goes, TV generals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, the problem now that we face here in our organization is that we want to drain the swamp, as you point out. There's no question about it. We want to drain the Washington swamp. The question is, how do you go about that? Well, you have to bring in fresh leadership at the top. And that leadership has to be resolute and determined, which means that they have to be willing to fire people. And that's a huge problem. I don't know if you've seen that in the private sector, but a lot of the people at the top of the military and government are very reluctant to fire anybody. They want to be popular. They want to be loved. Well, by the way, Donald Trump, for whom I feel personally a great deal of affection, I like him very much.
Yeah.
But he was always too nice. Always too nice.
Well, when you grow up like I did with essentially one parent and not a lot of money and so forth, and you want to get ahead and you're ambitious and all the things that a lot of kids are, you can tell right away whether someone is real or not. And I mentioned before, I'm finishing a book, and the chapter I haven't put in there yet, but I'm going to be putting in, is be genuine. And the reason you want to be genuine is because people can spot a faker, a phony, a glibster in a heartbeat. Now, they may want to continue on with the person one way or another, but you know that they're phonies and frauds. And sometimes you just get an instinct for that. You get some sort of an intuition. And I knew that Fauci was a fraud 5 seconds after he started talking. 5 seconds. And I bet you 99% of the people in the whole world did too. But they're assuming, well, he worked for the government. He's this, that, and the other thing. He's something we don't know. He's a fake doctor. He's whatever. I see that all the time. I think some people who are genuine in politics or in business, the good ones really, if they're smart and ambitious and hardworking, they make it. People relate to people who are authentic. People who are not.
I think you hit the nail on the head. The word authenticity is missing from most of the leadership that we have.
Like, for example, I don't think anybody who's in sales, and everybody's in sales, you sell a voter, you sell a student to do their homework, you sell a kid to make their bed. Everybody's in sales. Everybody. Why would you ever knock your customer? Like a basket of deplorables or whatever. Why would you say that? Okay, you're knocking your customer, and then it solidifies where they are from in the beginning. And so,
well, it reflects an attitude, and the attitude in Washington, and this is widespread right now, is that we are in charge, and there's nothing you can do about it.
And we're elite, and we're smarter.
Yep.
And, I mean, this guy that went to Yale, who's Secretary of Defense or something like that. What the hell is he? The Nate Sullivan guy? I mean, has he served in the military? Has he been on a forward line? Has he done anything? And he's the one that wrote the article that said the Middle East is more calm since 1973, and 2 weeks later the war breaks up. I mean, these guys are as phony as they come. Now, so you and I have been around, and we've been played with the big boys, and we can tell phonies, and we can tell the authentic. And the authentic are really there. And
well, the American voter has problems with it because the American voter is looking for someone that they think will save them, rescue them from the mess. And, that's a very anti-democratic position. I try to tell people, Americans did not come into existence because they were waiting around for someone to save them. They acted. That's our problem right now.
Yeah, they saved themselves. I thought JFK, John F. Kennedy, he had the greatest line of all. Now, whether he wrote it or not, I don't know. But he said, Ask not what the country can do for you, but ask what you can do for the country. Now, in the old days, my mother was a Democrat to the wool because she was Irish, right? First generation. That John F. Kennedy Democrat doesn't exist anymore.
No.
Now it's a prepaid credit card because you snuck into our country. I mean, seriously, it's like ridiculous. And so the people can see authenticity. Like if I were a constituent and I were, let's say, Black, let's say Latino, let's say whatever, and Hillary Clinton came to me and started talking like she was trying to talk in ghetto jive, I would be so offended by that. It's so inauthentic. It is so phony. It is so patronizing. Why I wouldn't vote for that person if they were the best, because they're phonies. Now, a real person gets up there and screws it, makes a mistake, whatever.
Of course, yeah. Well, one of the things that I periodically try to explain to people, they say, well, this man is wonderful. He was number one in his class at Annapolis or number one in his class at West Point. Yeah. And I look at them and I say, well, I don't want to burst your bubble, but the people that end up in that position are not exactly the best people we produce.
Right.
You try to go through and explain how do you end up there? What do you do to get there?
Right.
And people are sort of shocked. I keep trying to get people to understand that if you're going to pick people to go to Washington, you're better off picking no one who went to the Ivy League universities or service academies. Right. Don't go there. Those places, the well is poisoned. You've got to go away from that. Go out into the United States. Find Americans who simply lived normal lives, that have been business people or they served, I don't care if they were sergeants, whatever they are, bring them back and put them in the jobs. In other words, get away from this sort of so-called elitist pool, which is poison.
Right. We see it all over the country now. My clients, they're now recruiting from what are called mid-level colleges, so to speak, where the kids go and they study and whatnot, and they don't depend on the brand name of the college to carry them on. That's why my new book, Dumbing Down, is good. Because if you're ambitious, you want the other kid not to go to school, to act like a dope. And it's just creating this kind of easy environment for the hardworking, ambitious, studious person who needs to get a new job or get investments for a new business. They're going to win. They're going to win. And to me, I went to the schools with the brand names, and I know what it is to have your brand name sullied and tarred by phonies. And that's what we have today, as you know, at some of the biggest universities in the world. Yeah.
Well, one last question for you.
Yeah.
You've gotten to know a little bit about us, and you've already given us some excellent advice. And I think probably the most important thing that you said to us is, what are you trying to do? And the answer is, we want to drain the Washington swamp. That's really it.
Yeah.
And as you point out, we don't know everything about the swamp, but we want it to go away.
Right.
And we want to replace the swamp with better people that are actually interested in the country. One of the issues that you also mentioned is this notion of service. We seem to have lost a sense that there is something about service to the country, service to your community.
Right.
That is so important that it transcends other things. We're almost consumed with greed now. The notion that whatever we do, we have to have enormous piles of cash as a result, or we're not worth a damn.
Right.
How do we deal with that?
Well, I'm asked that question in different ways a lot, Douglas. My answer is, I grew up in the 50s. My formative years are bookended by the end of World War II and Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And in the interim, we had 8 years, at least, of Dwight D. Eisenhower, prosperity, civility, no wars, highways built. So we grew up, and at least I did, So we're probably biased by the fact that your neighbors could help you. That it was expected for fathers to go line league fields. It was expected for mothers to bring brownies for the kids after the games. We didn't have to. We were able to succeed on merit and performance. All these kinds of things. If people today don't experience that, don't know how fundamentally basic it is, it's very difficult to create a winning culture, right? To create a winning culture. And so the people we bring in, they don't have to be fancy. They could be Harry Truman's, real like guys are just not afraid.
Right.
They're just not afraid to do what everybody scorns them. I tell my kids, when all the lemmings are laughing at you, you've got something.
Yeah.
You've got something. What did Mark Twain say? A person is a crank before it's success, and then afterwards he's a genius or whatever. I mean,
well, he also said that the only truly criminal class in America was Congress.
And he's right. Of course, they try themselves, right? So I think draining the administrative swamp in Washington, draining the Washington, D.C. swamp is a spectacular mission. It's a galvanizing mission. It's understandable. And people who are being negatively affected in the hinterlands, where a guy can't build a pond on his own land because the EPA, get rid of that stuff. Get rid of the regulators. We're like a country, like people will know this, Jonathan Swift's book, Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver lands after a bad storm, he lands on a little island. He's exhausted from trying to swim to the island. When he wakes up, he's covered with millions and millions of gossamer threads. And those were the Lilliputians that tied him down. Now, he could break any thread, but he can't break millions of them. Right. And so what I think this organization should do, Douglas, if you don't mind my opinion, is giving people the scissors to cut those Lilliputian threads that are holding Gulliver down on the island. It's the little people against the giant, the little Lilliputians versus the giant Gulliver, but they strapped them down with, and that's what this administrative swamp has done. We got to cut those threads. The little people shouldn't be tying up America. They should be gone. And so if we can give your followers, and I hope there's millions of them in a month, something specific, some scissors to cut those government threads. EPA rules, health rules, every rule you can think of. It's just insane that we have unelected people changing the way we live.
Well, I think some of the most heroic Americans today are the women who are mothers and have children in schools who go to school board meetings and raise hell.
Absolutely.
They're probably doing more for this country today than any of us.
100%. I agree totally. That's one of the things that your organization should say. How can you help? How can you get the scissors to cut Gulliver's threads? Join the PTO or go to the meetings and shout. Right. Go to them. Go to these little places. They're the petri dishes of the administrative state. Every little community, every town, every state. And you know, when you meet these people, you're so underwhelmed. Not the mothers, not the fathers,
no.
The administrators. Right. You're so underwhelmed. Does anybody?
Listen, one of the things that I tell people when I finish speaking, almost always, I point out, look, the people in Washington that you are afraid of are spineless jellyfish. These are the kinds of people that when I was going to school, you punched out at recess. So don't be afraid of them. We will prevail. Stand your ground. Right. You know, these people remind me of the kids that I used to punch out at recess. You know, they're one punch commandos. They're worthless. So wake up, stop being afraid, because they are far more afraid of you than you realize.
That's true. And they are so weak when you meet them. Ask people, have you ever met your congressman? Have you ever met your senator? I got to tell you a story, and this, I don't know if it's relevant or not, Douglas, but I told you my mother was a died in the dirt Democrat because Irish, right?
Yeah.
So we lived in a rural town in Connecticut, and our senator at the time was a guy named Tom Dodd, the father of Chris Dodd, who ultimately became another senator. And he was the stereotypical senator, the white hair, big and florid Irish face, and the glib, glib, glib. For some reason, he was in our little town and talking to my mother out in our front yard. And so when he leaves, my mother said, "He's such a handsome man. It's too bad he's so dumb." And I said, I was like 14 or 15. I said, "Ma, what do you mean he's so dumb?" Because everybody knows he failed the bar exam 4 times. Of course, only my mother would know that. And I said, "Well, Ma, if he's so dumb, why are you going to vote for him?" She goes, "Jeffrey, he's going to be my senator, not my lawyer."
Well, I think your mother was a smart woman, but you
Oh, yeah.
asked the right question. You asked the right question. Why are you going to vote for him? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of us have decided, what's the point? Look at the choices that we're given. They're all bad.
Right.
And the worst thing, of course, is the notion that, well, my dad was a senator, so everybody is willing to pile cash into my pocket so I can carry on his good work. Well, of course, a lot of his work wasn't very good either, and it certainly didn't do a hell of a lot for the people that needed it.
Right.
So,
right.
well, listen, I've kept you too long, and we better make good use of the internet while we can. So I thank you for all the time that you've given us. We appreciate your advice. We will come to you in the future. Water is always purest at its source, and I think you're the fountainhead of real knowledge and understanding, and we appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, really. It's fun.
Okay.
It's fun.
We'll be in touch. Thanks a million.